the first 8,000-meter peak ever climbed, 3 years before Everest. And still, after more than 70 years, the mountain with the most unforgiving reputation in the Himalayas. This is Annapurna. Annapurna I sits at 8,091 meters in north-central Nepal, the 10th highest mountain on Earth. On the 3rd of June, 1950, Maurice, Herzog, and Louis Lachenal of a French expedition reached its summit via the north face, without supplemental oxygen, making it the first 8,000-meter peak in history to be climbed. So far, only 557 people have followed them to the top. 75 have died trying. For decades, Annapurna held the highest fatality-to-summit ratio of any mountain on the planet, roughly 1 death for every 3 summits. That number has improved with better forecasting and equipment in recent years, but Annapurna remains the most feared of the 8,000-meter peaks. It is less attempted than any other in Nepal. Not because it is unknown, because it is known. The name comes from Sanskrit. Anna, food. Purna, full. The goddess of nourishment. There is something deeply unsettling about a mountain this deadly, carrying a name that gentle. The Annapurna Massif stretches 55 kilometers across north-central Nepal, flanked to the west by the Kali Gandaki Gorge, one of the deepest gorges on Earth, and to the south by the Pokhara Valley. The massif contains 1 summit above 8,000 meters, 13 above 7,000, and 16 above 6,000. The entire complex sits within the Annapurna Conservation Area, 7,629 square kilometers, the largest conservation area in Nepal. The Kali Gandaki Gorge to the west is, by some measures, the deepest gorge in the world, deep enough that standing on the valley floor, you can look up at both Annapurna and Dhaulagiri simultaneously, 2 8,000-meter peaks rising from the same valley. From Pokhara on a clear morning, Annapurna's north face fills the entire northern horizon. It does not look inviting. It looks like what it is.
In 1950, no human had ever climbed an 8,000-meter peak. Not one. There were 14 of them, all unclimbed. A French expedition led by Maurice Herzog set out with a mandate from the French Alpine Club to reach the top of one. They studied the maps in the field, identified Annapurna, and spent weeks probing approaches through the narrow Maristi-Kola gorges with no surveys, no prior reconnaissance, and no fixed ropes. On the 3rd of June 1950, Herzog and Lachenal reached the summit via the north face, without supplemental oxygen. It remains the only 8,000-meter peak ever conquered on its very first attempt. The descent nearly killed them both. Caught in a storm, their hands and feet destroyed by frostbite, they fell into a crevasse and were rescued by teammates. The expedition doctor performed amputations on the mountain without anesthesia. Herzog lost all his fingers and toes. Lachenal lost all his toes. Herzog dictated his account from a hospital bed because he could no longer hold a pen. His book sold 11 million copies. Its final sentence became famous. There are other Annapurnas in the lives of men.
The mountain was not summited again for 20 years. In 1970, a British expedition led by Chris Bonington made the first ascent of the south face, a 3,000-meter near-vertical wall that many had considered unclimbable, and which remains one of the most technically demanding routes on any mountain on Earth. The summit was reached without supplemental oxygen. In 1978, the American Women's Himalayan Expedition became the first American team to climb Annapurna, reaching the summit via the north face. In February 1987, a Polish team completed the first winter ascent of one of the hardest achievements in Himalayan climbing at the time, given that Annapurna in winter is an entirely different mountain from the one that exists in spring. Each of these milestones added to the mountain's reputation not as a place to be conquered, but as a place that decides for itself who comes back. The standard climbing route today follows the Northeast Ridge, the same general line the French pioneered in 1950. The approach begins with a helicopter flight from Pokhara to base camp, at approximately 4,200 meters,
bypassing the Maurice gorges that consumed weeks of the original expedition. Those gorges are narrow, flood-prone, and dangerous. Before helicopter access became standard, reaching base camp alone was a serious undertaking before a single technical meter had been climbed. From base camp, the climb rises onto the North Annapurna Glacier, a broad, heavily crevassed plateau that feels deceptively manageable on clear days. The glacier threads between hidden crevasse fields across a wide, white expanse before narrowing toward the mountain's face. The mountain's position close to the Bay of Bengal means monsoon moisture loads the slopes rapidly, and sudden storms arrive without warning at any point in the season. 2 hours out of base camp, the glacier steepens, and the first serious objective danger begins with seracs. Unstable towers and overhanging blocks of ice hanging directly above the route, releasing without seismic warning at any hour of the day or night. There is no safe window, there is only faster and slower. Climbers move through it, and they do not stop. Camp 1 sits at approximately 5,150 meters on an exposed, dry ridge above the glacier, the last flat ground a climber will stand on before the gradient becomes unrelenting. Most teams use Camp 1 only for acclimatization rotations and skip it entirely on the summit push. Above Camp 1, the route crosses the glacier plateau before the real ascent begins, a steep climb through fractured ice and mixed rock rising to Camp 2 at approximately 5,700 meters at the very base of Annapurna's proper face. This is where the mountain reveals its true character. The passage between Camp 2 and Camp 3 is the crux of the entire climb and the most avalanche-exposed ground on the northeast ridge. The route traverses a vast plateau directly beneath the overhanging seracs of the so-called sickle, massive hanging ice formations that shed debris without warning. The route then climbs through the serac maze toward the cone-shaped couloir and the steep ramps above. The angle reaches 45 to 55 degrees across sustained sections, with short pitches of 70 degrees. No fixed rope protects a climber from a serac the size of a house releasing above their position. This is where Annapurna collects most of its dead. Camp 3 sits at approximately 6,500 meters on a narrow, steep, exposed ledge with room for only a handful of tents. It is uncomfortable and cramped. Climbers have described it as barely adequate, but it offers shelter from the worst serac exposure below. The section from Camp 3 to Camp 4 covers roughly 400 vertical meters through crevasse terrain, navigating among seracs at an altitude where the body is already running on diminishing reserves. Camp 4 sits at approximately 7,400 meters, the highest camp on the mountain and the launch point for the summit push. At this elevation, the physiological deterioration is cumulative and measurable. Muscle, cognition, judgment, all of it eroding hour by hour, whether the climber registers it or not. Winds arrive without a forecast. Temperature drops well beyond what any preparation fully accounts for. The route above Camp 4 is fully committing once a team pushes higher in deteriorating conditions. Retreat becomes its own emergency, as dangerous as continuing. The final push from Camp 4 to the summit at 8,091 meters follows obvious ramps, then mounts a rib to the right before gaining the summit ridge. Summit day typically begins between midnight and 2 in the morning, to allow the team to reach the top and begin descending before afternoon weather closes in. On a clear day, the summit view takes in the entire Annapurna Massif, Dhaulagiri to the west, and the full Himalayan chain stretching toward Tibet. Most climbers who reach it describe the moment as the most consequential of their lives. Statistically, the descent is more dangerous than the ascent. The body is exhausted, judgment is compromised, and the same loaded slopes and hanging seracs have not moved. Annapurna kills most of its climbers on the way back down. One odd fact about Annapurna: The summit is made of limestone rock, formed at the bottom of a warm ocean hundreds of millions of years ago. The same tectonic forces that drove the Indian subcontinent into Asia lifted that ancient seafloor to 8,091 meters above sea level. The deadliest place most climbers will ever go in their entire lives was once beneath the sea.